I'm at the Avatar booth, and with me is Si Spurrier.
Hello.
From Britain, who has written his crossed arc, which was originally serialized online, as is finally coming out in trade paperback and hardback. So I just wanted to talk to you, Si, about the way you wrote your storyline, because Garthen has pretty much set up this fairly elegantly simple format of a kind of plague that turns people into psychotic killers, and the people who weren't infected essentially trying to survive.
Yep.
So you give it to any writer and they can have their own take on it. So we've had David Lapham's take on it,
David Hine,
Jamie Delano, and I'm interested in talking about your take, because what you've done is that you've created a main character who's basically a former writer, so he has all the tics and the thought processes of a writer.
Yeah, he's basically me, isn't he?
Right.
Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, he also has the neuroses of a writer, and what's interesting is that you see his inner monologue where he believes that he's a bad person as he's trying to survive. And the interesting thing is that when you read his actions in the story, he's not that bad a person. Right.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're probably right. I mean, there's a certain amount of British self-deprecation in there, which is kind of me anyway.
Yeah.
I think to be brutally honest, one of the fun things to do is it started out as being essentially me, to the extent that I was sitting in a coffee shop writing a scene where he's sitting in a coffee shop writing when the cross thing all kicks off and starts. So it's all very meta, but I think in a non-wanky way. I mean, it's not literary magic or anything. It's just that I wanted to be able to be honest, emotionally honest. I wanted there to be earnestness in my character's reactions to this world that he lived in, and the only way I could see to do that would be to imagine myself in his position. And then it followed that since I'm interested in themes of art and creativity, since I would define, slightly pathetically, myself as somebody who is very, very, very aware that the only way I can value myself is according to my work and the way that people respond to it. And it interested me that in a world where the only thing that matters is survival, somebody like myself would find themselves essentially superfluous. You know, there's no reason to create art when there's nobody to read the words that he writes, nobody to look at the pictures that people paint, no culture left really. That's not entirely true, but that's the way he feels. He feels completely redundant. So that interested me. As time has gone on, since this scene where he's sitting there writing, he's diverged from me slightly as a result of the way that the world has changed. And I kind of do feel that some of his responses are slightly sickening. But I like to think that I can justify them. I like to think that they are reflections of ways that I would react. You know, and I say that with great honesty. I'm not proud of some of the stuff he does. It's more regularly things that he doesn't do. It's about ways that he reacts. For instance, in all the flashbacks leading up to the present, he attaches himself to a character who's very practical, like an old man, who starts to become a bit of a tyrant for his little team, and starts to abuse the women who are part of this group. And Shaky, the main character, is very aware of this. He knows that this guy is a monster, but he knows that if he acts out against it, defends these women, he's going to be cut free. And this guy is his only hope of survival. So it's a cowardly choice not to say anything, up to a point, and of course that story will come to its conclusion eventually. But yeah, it's something I have to think to myself, well, would I do that? Wouldn't I do that? Most of the time, it really is stuff that I fear I would do myself.
I mean, in many respects, that makes it a very moral story, because thematically, you basically juxtapose the fact that this guy who's extremely self-conscious and self-questioning, that he's essentially all superego.
Yep.
And you have him more basically pitted against a world with a plague that reduces everyone to pure, murderous, hungry id.
Yep.
And that seems to be the theme that gives you your story its driving dynamic.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I couldn't honestly say that I'd ever thought about it in those terms. I think what you described is absolutely right. I imagine that was a subconscious thing that occurred to me rather than using the terminology. But yeah, you're right.
But it fits rather well, because the way that your hero is reacting to the people in the community that he's trying to get along with, that what he's seeing and what he has to cope with and react to is their ego.
Yeah, I mean that's the part of the pleasure of telling a long form version of the Cross, a long form story in the Cross universe, is that where other shorter stories, self-contained serials and things, are very much about practical concerns, about staying ahead of the beasties, about how to survive day to day. The setup in Wish You Were Here is very much about long-term, day-to-day stuff. And so inevitably there's a lot of boredom, you know, there's a lot of quiet moments, and it translates, I think, very well in the comic to tension. Boredom to the character is tension to the reader. And you're absolutely right, I mean, it is as much, if not more, about the ways that these bored, hopeless, broken, sad people respond to each other's egocentric, tyrannical, megalomaniacal, hopeless, useless, cowardly, whatever it may be, selves, as it is about staying away from the Cross, fighting them, shooting them, all that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, both sides of the psychological coin, if you like, are surrounding this main character. You know, he's got the very instinctive, old brain, animalistic, primitive, moral-free, culture-dead Crossed, and he's got these people who are kind of trying to maintain some sense of humanity, some sense of culture even, against all the odds and against any hope, really.
Yeah, and that's why it's a book worth reading.
Thank you very much.
Simon Spurrier, thanks very much.
My pleasure, mate.